Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings from EJSLLC.com. This video is going to be another in my RHCE practice session series where I am working through the objectives in preparation for my Red Hat Certified Engineer exam. Before I dive in, I want to thank returning subscribers for watching another video, as well as invite anyone who's watching who has not subscribed yet to click that subscribe button and ring the bell when you do so you can be notified of when new content is available. Also, if you enjoy the video, make sure you click like and share with others that might find it useful. And lastly, feel free to leave comments. You can ask questions, leave praise, leave critique. It's all good, and I will respond as I have both time and ability, which means I might not get to everything, but I'll get to as much stuff as I can. So I'm continuing on my preparation for the RHCE exam, and I want to remind you that these videos aren't intended to be authoritative information, and they are not intended to necessarily be tutorial information. That being said, I do try to make the information as accurate as possible, but what these videos are intended to do is give me an opportunity to do some self-assessment. So I'll talk about the objective, and at the end of the video, if I feel like I've explained it pretty well or I felt confident in what I was talking about, then I'm probably pretty well prepared for that piece of the exam if I were to have tasks and things to do on the exam related to that objective. And likewise, and on the other hand, not really likewise, anyway, on the other hand, if I get to the end of the video and I feel like I've struggled with a lot of the stuff, then that tells me between now and about a month from now when I take my exam, I need to do some more studying or just more review to get more familiar with the concept and get it on the front side of my brain. Hopefully with these practice sessions, you might identify some things that you can do yourself with your own preparation for RHCE. And you also might find, perhaps I have a way of troubleshooting something or a way of explaining something kind of in my own words that you haven't considered before that might be helpful for you in learning the material as well. So the objective we'll be working with is under the core components, or rather under the understand core components of Ansible. We'll be looking at the modules objective. So I have my Red Hat Enterprise Linux Workstation. Let's go ahead and SSH into my Ansible control node. One thing to keep in mind is I have this already configured with, Ansible's been installed, and if I need to, I can SSH via key-based authentication to the host that I would be controlling by Ansible. I've already made me a Ansible user specifically for that. So while this particular video, you should be able to follow what I'm doing on your own if you're wanting to do the exact things that I'm doing for my own preparation. But mind you, a couple of the other videos in this understand core components of Ansible part, you might not be able to do that until you have done a basic Ansible install, which ironically in the objective list isn't covered till about halfway through the objectives. But anyway, modules. So this is the meat and potatoes of Ansible. Pretty much Ansible lives and dies, or at least as I understand it, Ansible lives and dies by its modules. The modules available to you are what make Ansible powerful, and the fact that you can write modules yourself if you wanted to, gives you kind of that unlimited maybe extensibility of Ansible. So the modules are, a lot will come pre-installed with what you have with Ansible. And the thing to understand is that these modules pretty much are Python scripts. So if I were to go on my Ansible control node and I'm actually going to start with some documentation here. Ansible doc user. There's a module called user. And yep, that's where it is. So if you were to use Ansible doc, which we'll talk a little bit more in detail in a few minutes, one of the first things it will show you is where the actual module lives. So I'm going to copy this path here. And let's clear the screen. We're going to CD to this path, but without the parentheses. And what you see in here are a bunch of Python scripts. And that is because really what these modules are Python scripts. Let me expand my window here just a bit. I want to do full maximize because sometimes it gets cut off with OBS. And let's VI into user.py or user.py. Now, I am not a Python developer. I have messed around with it some before, and I have some basic conceptual understanding of it, but you would not hire me to write Python now. Now, that might change in the future, but right now, no. So I'm not going to explain, what's going on in the script, but what I wanted to show you was that the modules that you're going to be working with are basically Python scripts. And so if you are a person that is knowledgeable of Python and can write it, you could potentially make your own modules to be able to do your specific things. Notice these options here. This is going to come back pretty soon and be significant for you. And I'm just going to page down through a bunch of this stuff. Yeah. There's one other thing that I wanted to, because I remember this being here, or I might not be remembering it that well. Oh, well, there it is. So notice user del. You've seen that command before in Bash and such. And what I was wanting to show is just basically, a lot of these Python scripts are running commands that you would normally run. Thus, that's what gives you the ability just like to use the user module to do a thing on a system. All right. And again, the location of this, let me quit out of VI. User lib, this is under Python 3.6, site packages, Ansible's modules system. Now, if I were to CD up, we have far more folders of modules. Like these few modules here aren't just it, and they're divided generally by their function, but ultimately this is where they are. Now, I do not know, let's say that you make your own module, as far as where you would store that and how you would let Ansible know that you exist. I'm not sure how that is. However, I'm fairly certain for the RHCE exam, you're not going to be required to write your own module and such. You'll be required to use modules, but not necessarily write your own module. So a big part of any Red Hat exam is understanding how to use the documentation, and there's a lot of built-in documentation available to you about the different modules in Ansible. I have, I know that there is online documentation. I think it's like docs.ansible.com, if I remember off the top of my head, that has a ton of documentation. I don't know if that's going to be available during the exam or not. I know on a Red Hat exam, you can't use good old Dr. Google to look stuff up. You have to use whatever's the built-in documentation. There's nothing that I have that I've seen on the objectives that makes me think that you would be able to go out to the internet to docs.ansible.com. If I get to the exam and I find out that I can, woohoo, that gives me a little bit more readable form of documentation. Otherwise, what you can get just from the command line is a ton. So let's clear our screen. I'm actually going to go back to my home directory. And as the name implies, the big command for our module documentation is Ansible doc. And I'm going to show you the -L flag. And what this is going to do is list all of the modules that you have available to you. And it also lists a little description about them. So let me quit out of that. Up to the top here, does it tell you? Not quite sure what those warnings are about. We'll take a look at that in a minute or so. But one thing that I have found very useful just with my own practice, when I was working with some of the SE Linux stuff, for whatever reason, I could not remember the name of a module when I was going through some practice examples. And so I Ansible doc-L, and I grept -I, so it's case insensitive, SE Linux. And lo and behold, a few things were returned, and the particular module that I was looking for was the SEF context module, which is what sets the file context for things. And even though the name of the module was SEF context, SE Linux was in the description. So this can be a kind of a lifesaver for you if you remember some of the function of a module, but you can't remember its exact name. That Ansible doc-L will be useful for you. Another use of the Ansible doc, in addition to just listing the modules, is it will give you a comprehensive documentation or comprehensive document about the module. So let's take a look at the user module. So Ansible doc and the name of the module user. And as we see, it tells you, where the Python script is located, and it tells you about all of the different options that are available. And if you recall, when we were digging through the Python script, some of those options, you're going to see them here in the documentation, because this is where they're being, the script defines what these options are, and they're available for you here. Now, notice what we have here, this is mandatory, this equal sign. So as you're going through these different options, and the options will tell you how they function and whatever the default is. So if you don't, let's say we do the user option and we don't actually use append, well, any function of append would be default false. It tells you the type of information that's needed for that, such as, notice how comment is string, this is bool. Now for bool, I have found that yes and no, work just as well as saying true false. And I want to think, in the back of my head, I remember seeing some documentation that says that Ansible is actually expecting to see yes, no more than true, false, but true, false should work. I'm not 100% sure on that. If you are a master of Ansible out there and you're watching the video to give critique and you know the answer to that, feel free to put that in the comments. But I do know yes, no works as well as usually true, false. I tend to do yes, no just to where I stay consistent. And continuing through, we'll get to a couple that have the equal sign, and that tells you that it is required. So the user module, you must tell it the name of the user, and not name as in like the gecko's comment part, but the actual username, because it has to know what it's either going to be creating or what it's going to be removing or what it's going to be modifying. Almost all of these other options are not required, but that one particular one is. Now, one thing I want you to take note of with the user module is the -password option. And it is expecting, with a couple of exceptions, an encrypted value for that, even though it says default type string. When we get to working with the user module, we'll go over a bit about how to make this happen. But just keep in mind that even if you're just kind of glancing through and you see type string, don't assume that it's always going to be just plain text string. There may be some times such as this where it's expecting something else. Another thing to take note of is some of these options were added later on as Ansible was developed. And I'm pretty sure on the RHCE objectives, it says that the test is going to be based on Ansible Engine 2.8. Not sure, when you're eventually watching this video, if that's still true, but you want to check that. But let's say that for whatever reason, we are in Ansible version 2.6, and so you're using Ansible 2.6 and you try to use profile. Well, profile is probably not going to work because it didn't exist for this module until version 2.8. So be mindful of the version added information. Now, this is well and good, gives you a ton of information, but when you're in your exam, you're probably not going to either have time to read through all of this per modules, which, if some of the common modules, if you're having to refer to documentation all the time, then, perhaps you need to get some more of those in the front of your brain. I'm not saying you would necessarily need to memorize everything for RHCE. I'm certainly not going to memorize everything, but some common stuff I'll have. But if you just need a brief overview, we can use the -s flag. So Ansible doc -s user, and this is going to give you a much more abbreviated view. And what I find particularly useful for this is just looking to see if there is something required, whereas you don't have the equal sign for that anymore, but you'll see required in parentheses for that. I find myself using Ansible doc -s far more often than Ansible doc, because that's kind of akin to, you put a command into the man page and you just briefly look over the flags, because, there's some commands that use -R for recursive. There are some commands that use -r. A quick glance at the man page is what you need. You don't have to read the whole thing. And that's what the Ansible doc -s does. Kind of gives you the glance of it. One other thing that is useful, and let's actually look at the man page for Ansible doc. This is something I used recently. Ansible, if I can spell that correctly, is the -t flag for type, because there's more than just modules to work with in Ansible. And I think one particular thing, and I think I used it in my last video, perhaps, I wanted to look up some documentation on inventory things, and so using the Ansible doc -t flag allowed me to find documentation for inventory. So not specifically related to modules, but I did want to mention that with Ansible doc. So the modules themselves, this is going, let's see, probably the best way to describe this is using both an ad hoc and playbooks for working with this. And what we'll do, we'll actually stick with the user module. So let's say that we want to make a user and we want to give it a username, and we want to set its gecko's name. So if I were to do an Ansible ad hoc command, just Ansible, we'll do this against just one of our, actually, do I actually have inventory? Let me sudo su into my Ansible account. I think I have all that stuff, or I should have all that stuff set up. I'll have to specify the inventory file. So that's fine. All right, so we'll do Ansible. The first of my lab servers, I'm going to specify the inventory file. We'll do -m for module, user module, and then if we just do this, it's going to complain. It's going to complain for a couple of reasons probably, but I'm just curious to see what it says missing required arguments name. So if you're doing an Ansible ad hoc command and you are trying to use the arguments or the options that you need for your module, so in this case we're going to be doing name, which is required, and comment. What you'll need to do for that is Ansible, then whatever you're going to run this against, M for the user module. The -a is how we feed this arguments. So we're going to say name, and you have to do this in quotes. I think you can do single quotes as well. Name equals, we're just going to call it test user 1, and then space delimited if you have multiple arguments that you want to give it. So I wanted to give it comment, and we're going to put that in single quotes since we're doing everything else in double quotes. Test user 1. I'm going to do the -b flag for become, which will, I guess I can mention that now. That's one of my critiques of the listing of the objectives for RHCE. It's done in a way that you really can't just like go down the list, learn it, and go. I mean, you need to skip around to get some pieces. But anyway, basically, the -b flag is going to elevate your user to whatever account is set in your Ansible configuration, which by default is root. This is the same as basically doing sudo whatever it is that you're wanting to do. Because when my Ansible user here connects to the managed node, it's basically running user add to do this, and you have to have root privileges for that. So that's why I'm doing the -b here. So this should work. Famous last words in IT, right? Should. All right, so I got something has changed, and let's run this again. Notice that this time we didn't get a change, we got a success, because what Ansible did, remember Ansible's all about, setting your node to a particular state. And so the state of test user 1 exists with the comment test user 1. That state is already, the server's already in that state. So therefore we have a success. And then, if there was some type of a failure, such as, let me do this. So I know that doesn't exist. Well, that we got a warning. You can also have failure, which would usually be in red, which there's some type of, I'll bet I can do this. Let me try this without -b. Trying to think of a way to give you a failure in an ad hoc command. There we go. So failed. Permission denied, because I did not do the -b there. But what this module did was run that Python script, and I am fairly sure, I would need to double check this, but I'm fairly sure this script runs on the actual host itself, not on the control node. And I think when you're using raw stuff, like if you're working with network devices, the processing is happening on your control node rather than on the network device. But for modules, I'm pretty sure the processing is happening on the actual host itself rather than the Ansible control node, which is one of the reasons why with Ansible, and again, this is kind of getting ahead of where I am in the objectives, but Python has to be installed on your on all of your managed nodes to be able to do your Ansible stuff. So if we want to double check this, I can SSH. I'll just use Ansible because it has the permissions to do that. Labrel AN01. We're going to cat etc passwd. And we see here our test user 1. We see the geckos comment. Thus that module worked. Now that's obviously not the only module. There are many modules. I think in a previous video you saw me use the ping module, which if I were to do Ansible doc ping, basically is something that you can use to test if nodes are online and responding. And actually, one other thing that I wanted to mention, these usually, sometimes you'll see examples with this, but here it is. It will tell you the return value, which later on that can be something that can be useful for using variables and doing some conditional stuff. So that we did the module as an ad hoc command. Let's make a quick little playbook. So I'm going to call it user test.yml. I'm not going to go into the structure of playbooks yet. I'll do that on another video, but we're just going to do testing user module. Do it on a different host this time. All right, so we finally get to our tasks, and our tasks are going to be modules, or rather our tasks are going to run modules. So we'll give this task a name, and it's going to be test user module. We'll give it the module name, so that's going to be user. Now that's the same as your ad hoc command doing -m user. Now we're saying the module name in our playbook, and then if you remember in the ad hoc command we did -a and then start giving it the different options and arguments. Here we're just doing that as a child, so to speak, of the module name. So we'll do name : I think you can do equals. I'm not 100% sure on that. I'll do one more space over. But almost every playbook that I have seen, you have used : for stuff. I think where equals might come in, if you were to string multiple parameters together, like user : and then a bunch of parameters, that's where you would use equals. I'm not 100% sure on that though. We'll call this test user. Well, you do test user 1, and then comment test user 1. I don't have to use quotes here because this is all a part of its line. And that is it. So if we were to run our playbook, notice I'm using Ansible playbook this time instead of just Ansible. Give it the playbook name, and let's see what happens. No host match. Oh, I know why. Yeah, I have it like fully set up what I would normally have for my Ansible lab because we're not there yet in the objectives. I need to tell it the inventory file to use. And we see that we get the changed message. So let's SSH Ansible at labrel AN02. We're going to cat etc passwd. And there we have our test user 1 as done by doing the module. Now I'm not going to go in this particular video and demonstrate a bunch of different modules because a lot of the objectives later on are asking you to do particular tasks using modules, and so that'll be the showcase of it. But the basic thing to take away from this, and then as far as kind of assessing your own understanding, do you know what modules are, which are Python scripts? Do you understand how to look up documentation, which we do? And do you understand the concept of the fact that modules are going to have your options, which dictate how this module is going to behave on your managed node to bring it to the desired state? So I hope this was helpful for you. As always, I want to thank returning subscribers for watching another video and want to invite everyone, if you haven't subscribed yet, to do that. Also, don't hesitate to leave comments. I'm glad to receive the feedback. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you click like and share it with others that might find it useful as well. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you the next time.